Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for Pisces rising, otherwise known as the Ascendant. And this video is part of a series. I actually have made the other 11 videos already, and it fell through the cracks. And I ended up going on to do other videos, but not remembering to do Pisces. And you could kind of say that that's symbolic of Pisces in general, where they tend to slip through the cracks. And this is because they're very sensitive. They don't necessarily try to push ahead and be number one and to be first. They're very adaptable to other people's needs. And so they can grow up in families and be the lost child. If you know anything about the different roles that children play within the hierarchy of the family, they can be the lost child that people just forget about. And so basically, when we're talking about the rising sign, we're talking about the physical characteristics of the person. So it could be the way that their body type is. It could be the type of clothing that they choose. It can be. And so it's therefore the image that they present to other people. It's not necessarily that they are putting on an act or anything like that. It is going to be part of who they are, but there's a possibility that as they get older that they will lose that influence in a large extent that the rising sign has, and that the sun sign will take over. That was the theory that I had based upon what I have read about it dissipating over the age of 30. And I kind of like linked it to the first Saturn return, which ends around the age of 30. But in addition to that, the sun is our core self. And so if the person identifies more with the rising sign, even past the age of 30, and kind of rejects whatever the sun sign represents, then that can indicate that the person hasn't been ready to evolve to the whatever this lifetime has required of them. And they may be avoiding that growth, because I feel like the rising sign and the moon sign are more familiar energies for the person than the sun sign. And so that you have to really give the sun sign a great emphasis in your life and kind of honor those qualities that make it up. Now, if the Pisces person has a sun sign that is in water, because Pisces is a water sign, they may have a great consistency between how they present themselves and who they really are. But there are certain signs where the rising sign may seem a little bit off to other people, and they may think of the Pisces rising person maybe as even a little bit inauthentic, a little bit phony. So let's say your sun sign is Aries and you have Pisces rising. You may be, I was going to say the cowardly lion, but it's actually the cowardly lion in reverse, where you're cowardly, but you're actually very fierce. And people are like, whoa, I thought that you were like a pushover, and instead I got Rambo on steroids. So it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you want to call it that. And but anyway, let's talk about what kind of actual qualities would be present with Pisces rising. The first thing is that there's going to be vulnerability. And using a famous person as an example, that I found a very compelling way to present this is Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston had her sun in Leo, her moon in Aries, and Pisces rising. And even saying had in the past tense, it's like, wow. I mean, if you're somebody who's over the age of 40, maybe even over the age of 50, you really know how major Whitney Houston was in her day, in her prime. She was one of the big stars. And when I first met her, and I feel like, and I have said this story over again, so I don't know what the context was. I was bringing up Pisces rising. So this is kind of, hopefully you guys didn't hear this because I'm going to tell the story again. When I first became aware of her, she was a model, and she was like, just like maybe like 17 years old. She was in 17 magazine. And I remember, her face, her beauty was significant enough for me to remember that her name was Whitney. They didn't say Houston, they just said Whitney. And then a few years later, in the mid-'80s, that was when she started hitting it big with music. And the way she was marketed, and this was before YouTube, so we only really got to hear her when she was being interviewed. But she seemed to have a very classy demeanor, and she just seemed very feminine and things like that. Wasn't paying attention to her astrological sign, anything. And then later on, when I think she started to have I don't know if she started to have a little trouble. It might have been after she met Bobby Brown, I'm not sure, but I saw an interview with her and she talked so rough. And I was like, what in the heck? It just like blew my mind. And I was like, that's Whitney? It didn't seem like, the face and the voice did not match each other. And at one point I did look it up and I found out that she had a moon in Aries. And I said, you know what, that's probably it. She's a double fire sign. That's a masculine. These are masculine signs. And maybe she just is like that. She's very aggressive. But then I saw something else and she was very vulnerable. And I found out she had Pisces rising. So there was always something in her that may have been a little bit lost, a little bit feeling like she wasn't good enough, like she couldn't be loved for who she was. And there are, reports that she was perhaps not presenting the full image of who she was, that she might have been keeping some of who she was, and when it really isn't who she is. But I'm talking about, I don't want to go into her private life, but Pisces can be secretive, Scorpio rising or Scorpio in general, but Pisces can also be secretive. I think all the water signs can, because they are protecting their emotions and they just really sometimes are not forthcoming about their true feelings and things like that. So that kind of maybe situation inside of herself where she felt that she was putting on an act may have really bothered her, and that might have contributed to some of her choices that she made. Pisces, of course, is associated with escapism and addiction, and that is a form of escapism, addiction. So for sure that, but also learned helplessness, feeling like the person cannot that they can't really take control of their own life, that they don't have the ability to make things happen for themselves and empower themselves. That almost maybe being a victim of fate. And I could see Pisces as very fatalistic for sure. So if anybody knows about Cardi B, I would love to know what her rising sign is, because I have not been able to find her time of birth. And she strikes me as the same thing, where she has the moon in Aries as well. Very, outspoken, crazy outspoken, says outrageous things. Sun in Libra, very entertaining. Very naturally intelligent, naturally bright, even though she says some things that are, make your hair stand on end. But she is a very entertaining person, funny, very funny. And I would love to know what her rising sign is. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Pisces, because I do see glimpses. I've seen interviews with her where she's very vulnerable. And then there's other times where she's very ballsy, where she's very in your face and acting like she's tough. But those glimpses of her sensitivity were very compelling. I know she has Scorpio in, I think, her Venus and Mars, at least one of those. And so I could totally see that and seeing that as that water energy. But I still wonder if she has Pisces rising. Pisces rising for a woman can be the damsel in distress kind of a vibe that you give off if you're a woman. And even if you're a man, I mean, the male version of damsel in distress, the helpless little boy, okay? And this can go back to the family of origin, the lost child, where you may have, you know, in some cases, a child gets sick with a serious disease or serious chronic problem. And that's the time when they finally get attention. They weren't getting sick to get attention, but they maybe they were lost in the shuffle until they got sick. And then that can become part of the person's makeup where they are a hypochondriac or they always are looking for attention through illness, through being taken care of by people in a hospital setting. So the person with a lot of mental health issues and things, Pisces rules, and Neptune rule the 12th house, which deals with hospitals and prisons. So people who have Pisces rising can oftentimes trigger these nurturing tendencies from others because they seem so helpless and hapless that other people want to nurture them and cuddle them and do all these things. And other qualities too, like if we're talking about physical characteristics, there can be, like with women especially, but possibly with men. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure this is true of everyone. A very, very big eyes that are dreamy and shiny. And so speaking of other worlds, which is what Neptune is all about, and the 12th house is all about, other worlds, otherworldly, maybe an aura about them. And so maybe even this kind of, like ethereal quality. Again, a helpless quality, a kind of a maybe disorganized type of a person who is very like a day late and a dollar short, but very compassionate, very gentle, very artistic. And so it's an impractical sign, but it's also very imaginative, Pisces. So we're talking about like a fairy princess or if it's a male fairy that's in the forest and just an elf or anything like that. And the other thing that we have to remember too is that Pisces is a mutable water sign. So the emotions can be all over the place, as well as even physically. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you that have Pisces rising can look different. I mean, physically different from day to day. And people are like, whoa, how did you look, even like your weight change? There can be sometimes a little bit tendency towards fluid retention with Pisces rising, but definitely changeability where people are like, you look completely different to me. And Neptune is your ruler since it rules your rising sign of Pisces. So Neptune rules photography. And so what is photography but images captured on to film? And a person who is photogenic, they really are captured quite well on film, but in person, they may be different in terms of how they look. So it can be very fascinating to kind of see you from day to day because you may change. Okay, well, I hope that you enjoyed this, and that's what I have for you. So take care. Bye.